Asia was also affected by these events. For example, the Opium War. It was a conflict between the Chinese and the British in 1839 and 1842. It began with the Chinese attempts to stop opium being smuggled into their country. The British refused to stop their activity. The Chinese blockaded the foreign area to force traders to surrender their opium. The British responded with force, starting the Opium War. This war finished with the Treaty of Nanjing, 1842. The Chinese agreed to open 5 ports to British trade, limit taxes on British goods, and pay for the expenses of the war. China also agreed to give the British ownership of the island of Hong Kong. This war marked the beginning of the establishment of Western influence in China. The Great Rebellion was also an important event. In 1857, an Indian distrust of the British led to a revolt. The major cause of this revolt was a rumor that the troops' rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat. When sepoys refused to serve, the British imprisoned them. This caused a violent backlash where the sepoys killed British men, women, and children. Indians from different socioeconomic groups joined them in the rebellion. 1 year later, the rebellion ended with the support from Indians loyal to the British Crown. The British East India Company power transferred to British Crown. India would be ruled by a viceroy. This rebellion helped to fuel Indian nationalism and sentiments of separatism. Another event was the Meiji Constitution of 1889, which was established when the Meiji Restoration took place. The Meiji Restoration ended with the regime of Tokugawa shoguns and put in place a new form of centralized bureaucratic government. It brought the end to the country's feudal society. The Meiji Constitution established the emperor as the head of the state. It set up 2 legislative bodies, the House of Peers and the House of Representatives, and it established an executive and judicial branch of government. It also set up a system of taxation designed to raise money to support the activities of the government. The Meiji Constitution gave Japanese citizens the right to vote and granted them freedom of religion, free speech, and freedom of assembly. As we can see, during the 19th century, capitalism increased because they started to have more contact with others for trade and open the market. On the other hand, democracy decreased. People was no longer involved in most of the events. There were also important events in Africa. One of these events was the Scramble of Africa. In the late 18th and early 19th, 7 European powers, France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Spain, Belgium, and Portugal, were active in claiming African territory as their own. It was motivated by 3 main factors: economic, political, and social. It followed the collapse of the profitability of the slave trade, its abolition and suppression. It also was led by the rivalries between the different European countries involved. African colonies were marketplaces where European products could be sold. After some years, this resulted in many wars across the continent.
The Boer Wars also made their impact. In the south of Africa during the 19th century were a conflict between Britain and the German settlers in that region. The British succeeded and took power in South Africa, unifying it. This event decreased democracy because of the government that Britain had in that time and increased capitalism with industrialization.
Another event of Africa was the Berlin Conference of 1884. It was caused because European countries wanted some parts of Africa. To settle all this conflict down, Otto von Bismarck convened the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885. This conference recognized the British and German claims for territory in East Asia. Portugal received Mozambique. During this meeting, there were no African delegates present. After the conference, the scramble of Africa speeded up.
As conclusion, we can see that the events in Africa were relevant to all the world. The democracy decreased a lot, and capitalism increased in that communities.
Now I'm going to talk about important events that happened in Europe. For example, the Crimean War. The Crimean War happened in 1853. The causes were that Russia was expanding into the Danube region, which is Romania today. This was under Turkish control, therefore Turkey and Prussia went to war. The unification of Italy happened in 1848. The Crimean War was a big influence in Italy's unification because it caused the alliances between France and Italy versus Austria. The consequence was that Italian unification. For the description, we can say the Crimean War using the peace conference to give international publicity to the cause of Italian unification. One of the most important characters was Garibaldi, who failed in his attempt to create an Italy unified by democracy. The unification of Germany happened in 1850. After the Crimean War, the German states wanted to unify and create a German empire because of the political differences with other countries. War happened between France and Prussia. In 1871, they won and unified. Prior to unification, there were very small states in Central Europe, and Germans wanted a nation that was united. Unification joined together the many independent German states. These states became the German Empire. In conclusion, we can say that Europe was the most important one because it is a continent that has a lot of power. Also, it was influenced by external countries and capitalism increased.
Latin America's central and southern regions, since they had their first civilizations, lived under non-democratic regimes until their independence from Europe. When the Spanish or Portuguese people arrived and conquered them, for example, they carried with them the monarchy from Europe, which is an opposite idea to democracy. The Latin American people didn't seek for a change or improvement in their governmental system until the late 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, just after the influence of the Enlightenment ideas and revolutions for liberty and democracy in countries like France and United States. The process of independence from the European countries began with Haiti's revolution in 1804, led by Toussaint Louverture. Then Simón Bolívar led Venezuela's, Colombia's, and Ecuador's revolts against the crown. By the end of 1824, Peru, Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile and Brazil had become free of Spain. Nowadays, people in Latin America, except for Cubans, live in a capitalist and democratic system. Nowadays, people in Latin America, except for Cubans, live in a capitalist and democratic system.
Democracy and capitalism had been very important throughout the world in many countries because the government and the people are always fighting for them. Some people are against, some people are in favor of one or another, but they are always have been really important, and those are two teams that are really present nowadays and we should discuss.